Hello and welcome to the Cash Game Locks podcast. I'm Big Italy 42 here, talking about some cash game options for you for Tuesday night. FanDuel and DraftKings, and do things a little bit differently here today. I'm going to give you all the options, which guys I'm looking at, which guys I like, which guys are more of GPP options, although they may be enticing, things like that. So without further ado, I'm going to talk FanDuel first here. Obviously, pitchers, it's going to be your decision is going to come down to whether you're paying for pitchers or whether you're paying for batters tonight. Top option, as he pretty much always is when he's in play, Clayton Kershaw facing off against an Oakland team that is one of the worst in all of baseball against left-handed pitching. They're also the second worst overall offense in baseball of the last 30 days, a 285 team WOBA, 136 ISO. Still just striking out at 18.6%, which is the only drawback for Kershaw. He's a minus 230 favorite in Oakland, in a game with the lowest total on the night, 6.5 runs. Everything going in his favor, aside from the fact this team does not strike out much. They also don't hit the ball very hard, though, especially against left-handed pitching. So at $13,400 on FanDuel, $15,000 on DraftKings. He's going to be tough to fit, but, I mean, you know what you're going to get out of Kershaw. FanDuel-wise, he's probably going to get you 15 to 25 points, and on DraftKings, you're anticipating 30 to 35, maybe even more. I will say I do think the strikeout upside is down a little bit, but especially on DraftKings where you're paying $15K, I mean, this is certainly a guy that could end up getting you that bonus. The shutout bonus, maybe even the complete game shutout bonus. Really not a single right-handed batter in this lineup that you're worried about. I mean, Billy Butler hits lefties pretty well. You got Danny Valencia that's now in play. So he's going to be probably the one guy you're actually a little bit worried about, but, I mean, it's still Clayton Kershaw. You're not concerned about guys like Danny Valencia and Billy Butler. I mean, if those are the guys you're mentioning, then Kershaw is still your obvious top option. Next behind him, as far as guys that I like in particular, I like Francisco Liriano at $10,300. Another huge favorite, minus 210 right now at Pittsburgh. Facing off against an Arizona team that really got to Garrett Cole last night, but we're looking at a 7-run total. Huge favorite, like I mentioned, for Liriano. And Arizona's a team that they are a little bit better against lefties, but they're also better on the road. You look at their numbers over the past 30 days, they're right around the middle of the pack. 326 team WOBA, 13th in the league. So, I mean, this is still a good team, but one that definitely can be subdued by a guy that missed a lot of bats, like Francisco Liriano does. 14% swinging strike rate on the season, 12.6 over the last 30 days. So this is, for me, my second favorite option today because he is significantly cheaper than Jacob deGrom, who I love as probably more of a tournament option. I think he's an okay cash game option because he's been very consistent. But it's also a Baltimore team that can really do a number, especially at home against right-handed pitching. They have a lot of power up and down their lineup. And, I mean, deGrom's not a guy that gives up very much hard contact, strikes out a ton of batters. But, I mean, due to the fact that he's in a pick'em with Kevin Gausman, I'm not sure that I'm trying to slot him into my cash games at $11,600 on FanDuel and $11,600 also on DraftKings. I think if you take the savings of $1,900 on FanDuel and $1,300 on DraftKings, that can do a lot for you with your bets and going down to Liriano instead. So I slightly prefer him. My next favorite guy that I'm looking at is James Shields. Comes in at a really nice price on FanDuel at $8,700 and $8,600 on DraftKings. Now, this is a guy who you look at his logs, and he's been good, not great. In fact, hasn't really had a dominant performance in quite some time. But he also hasn't had a bad performance in quite some time either. So this is a guy who, his last start against the Reds, 5 earned runs, but he did have 7 Ks. Obviously, that was less than what you'd like out of him. But what you do get out of Shields is you get strikeout upside, and you get a guy that generally pitches deep into games. Over his last 4 starts, pitched into the 7th inning in 3 of those 4, finished the 7th in 1 of them. And, you know, this is an Atlanta offense that is just awful right now, especially without Freddie Freeman. They rank 28th in the last 30 days with a 288 team WOBA. They are only striking out 17.1% of the time, but James Shields is a guy that does miss quite a bit of bats, and this is also a guy who pitches deep into games, like I mentioned. So not a guy that you're concerned about, you know, with pitch count. Like some of these other middling options, there are guys who you're worried maybe they get pulled after 85, 90 pitches, but you look at what James Shields has done. Four of his last 6 games, 5 of his last 7, he's pitched over 100, thrown over 100 pitches, threw 117 against Seattle about a month ago. So, I mean, this is a guy that you don't worry about him getting pulled, things like that. And obviously his biggest concern is the long ball, but Petco Park obviously helps him out there, and low total here. So I like him quite a bit because of discount. I don't think he has a ton of upside in this matchup because, like I said, Atlanta puts the ball in play, but I do think that he's a very safe option that, should be able to get you, I'd say 10 to 12 points on FanDuel, maybe a little bit more. That's probably his floor. DraftKings-wise, probably 18 to 25 type of thing. He is a minus 190 favorite. Matt Whistler on the other side, who hasn't been very good. So he's my next favorite option. If you have to have a cheap option, and this is going to be DraftKings specific because I am not going to be playing this guy on a one-pitcher site like FanDuel, but I don't mind $5,100 Kevin Gausman against the Mets. Mets just not a very good offense. Gausman's got good stuff, and despite the tough park here, this is a guy who, DraftKings-wise, has 21 or more points in 3 of his last 4. His one bad outing was against the Angels. Before that, he had some ups and he had some downs, but I mean, this is a guy who has solid stuff, and you don't expect him to get hit hard today. Obviously, Vegas tends to agree. He's in there with a pick'em with Jacob deGrom. So not a guy that I'm excited about in my cash games, but if I can get a bunch of big bats and a top pitcher, maybe even a Kershaw, you can pair those two for $20K, which costs you less than it would for Liriano and Jacob deGrom. Get creative with it if you want. I think if I have to have a cheap option, though, because I want to pay for some bats, I think that's the way that I'll be going. I don't feel particularly good about any of these other cheap guys tonight. So those are the pitchers I'm looking at in cash games. Nobody else really stands out as an option that I have any sort of confidence in. As we're looking at catchers here, quite a few guys that stand out. Brian McCann, of course, if you can afford him. For me, going to be the top play once again. He was last night. Certainly didn't disappoint with a home run, 5 RBIs among 3 hits. He's $3,300 on FanDuel tonight, which is not a bad price at all. $4,700 on DraftKings. A little bit tougher to stomach there. My swerve off him is going to be John Jaso, $3,200 on DraftKings, $25 on FanDuel. It's not an elite matchup. Actually, pretty tough matchup against Scott Feldman, who's been pretty good against left-handed batters this year. 298 will be allowed. But I'll take the leadoff hitter with a big park shift in this matchup here. And the Rays have been a very hot offense. So Jaso, not a guy with a ton of power, but he's a guy that's a consistently good hitter. You expect he'll get you on the board, get you a couple points, and that's really all you can ask for tonight, especially at his cheaper price tag. Other guys that I'm looking at a little bit, I like Yan Gomes. He's $2,800 on FanDuel, and he's $3,600 on DraftKings. He's a fine option against a lefty. A nice park shift to Fenway for him as well. Not a particularly great hitter, but he's much better against lefties. So those are the guys I'm looking at primarily at catcher. I don't mind Victor Martinez at $3,000 on FanDuel, but not a guy that I'm rushing out to get. He's more of a secondary or GPP option for me with some upside. First base options, this is where it's going to be tough because, as always, there's a ton of options. I always love Joey Votto as a cash game play. Edison Volquez, though, actually been pretty tough against lefties so far this season, allowing just a 278 WOBA. No matchup's really going to scare me off of Joey Votto, especially when he has the platoon advantage. You look what he's done. Got over a 500 on-base percentage since the All-Star break. Been very consistent. So you got to pay $4,100 for him on FanDuel, which is a little bit pricey. You don't love that, but I think it's a very safe option. $49 on DraftKings. Other options, I absolutely love Eric Hosmer. For a while there, he was a GPP option, but I mean, this guy's insanely consistent. You look at his DraftKings logs. Each of his last 8 games, he has at least 9 DraftKings points. You got to pay a pretty penny for him at $4,800 on there. I think he's a very safe option with upside. $4,000. Coincidentally, $100 cheaper on both sites than Joey Votto. So I like him a great deal. If you're going cheap, Ben Paulson sticks out once again. $3,500 on DraftKings, $3,200 on FanDuel. He's a fine option to get yourself a cheap piece of the Coors Field action. You can look at a guy like Ryan Zimmerman. More so for me on FanDuel, where he's $3,900. 46 I'm not in love with on DraftKings, although I think he's an okay option at that price. Albert Pujols, another guy to consider against John Danks. Way too cheap on FanDuel, $3,600, 42 on DraftKings. Mentioned John Danks, that should be all you need to know here. 368 will be allowed to righties. He's been much better recently. I keep saying it. A lot of people keep saying it. I'm still not a believer the guy's a good pitcher. I know he has good stuff at times, but he's not a consistent pitcher. And Pujols starting to heat up once again. Homers in 2 of his last 3 games, so I like him as another option for you. Prince Fielder's another guy I'm considering. More so just because he's cheap on FanDuel and he's been very consistent. But Hisashi Iwakuma on the other side is a tough pitcher. Not a guy that I'll be playing tonight. Not a big fan of targeting games in Texas, especially with righties. So right now, for him, he's not a guy I'm targeting a lot. But if there's one guy I'm going to play, it's Prince Fielder, who's too cheap on FanDuel. You don't love his price tag on DraftKings, but it's still not bad at $4,200. So definitely a guy to keep on your radar. Second base option is going to be a fun night for that. Brian Dozier's still too cheap on FanDuel. He crushes lefties. CC Sabathia is terrible against righties. I mean, that's a match made in heaven for me. I was excited to play him yesterday. I still did play him yesterday in cash, but definitely a guy that I like even more today against CC. So he's a great option for you there. Other options, D. Gordon, once again, with the platoon split here. Platoon advantage against Tyler Cravey, who has not been a very good pitcher. And Tyler Cravey allowing a 4.24 WOBA to left-handed batters in a small sample size this season. So D. Gordon, certainly a guy, get on, steal a base. He's been more aggressive, now 3 steals in his last 5 games. He's got a real nice high floor here in this matchup at Miller Park. So you got to like him if you're paying down a little bit. Cesar Hernandez, more so on DraftKings where he has a better price. You can play him second base or shortstop. I like that. Neil Walker, another one of those guys. Got a great price tag, $3,000 against Chase Anderson on FanDuel. Chase Anderson hasn't been a terrible pitcher, 327 WOBA to lefty, so we know Neil Walker much better from the left side of the plate. So he's a guy that I'll be considering. And you look at his price tag on DraftKings, $3,600 is a phenomenal price for him. So that's another guy that I'm looking at. Outside of that, Kike Hernandez, Enrique, whatever you want to call him. FanDuel calls him Enrique. He's Kike on DraftKings. He is very cheap, $2,800 on DraftKings, $2,400 on FanDuel. So if he's in the lineup, he should be in the top 5, probably batting second, I would assume. He's a great cheap option for you there. Moving on to third base, I like these Twins righties once again. Miguel Sano, Trevor Plouffe. Sano probably going to be the more popular guy, especially on FanDuel. $3,600, great price. Homered last night. Now he gets Sabathia. You know the story here. He hasn't hit lefties as well as he's hit righties so far this season. But, I mean, mashed lefties in the minors, so you got to like him. Some other options, I really like Mike Moustakas on FanDuel specifically. He's min salary. Probably going to bat around 6, I would assume here. But this is a guy with some significant upside. He's absolute minimum. Raisel Iglesias has really struggled against lefties so far this season. He's got great stuff, but has been inconsistent. 25 and 2/3 innings. He's allowed 19 earned runs and a 356 WOBA to left-handed batters. So he's certainly a guy that I'm looking at for cheap. I don't love his price tag on DraftKings, but I think he's still a fine option. Another guy you can consider, he's actually hit righties better than lefties, but Felix Doubront, not a good pitcher by any means. Justin Turner has a nice price tag on both sites. I don't mind targeting him just a little bit either. Outside of that, nobody that really stands out. You can play Ryan Zimmerman at third base on DraftKings if you like, but like I said, $4,600. I'd rather save big salary for some other guys there. Shortstop, if we're talking DraftKings, I already mentioned Cesar Hernandez and Kike Hernandez. Both the Hernandezes are my favorite plays because they're cheap. You gotta like them. I like Eugenio Suarez, $2,500 on FanDuel, $37 on DraftKings. I don't love, but he's cheap. Alcides Escobar and Gene Segura, both those guys really cheap as well. I don't really feel like the need to pay up. I like Ian Desmond tonight quite a bit, but I'm not going to be paying up for him in cash games, despite the matchup in Coors Field. He's more of a tournament option for me. I'm going to go ahead and move on here to the outfield, where your top option at any position tonight is Bryce Harper. I don't think he's particularly hard to get into your lineup on FanDuel if you're not paying for Kershaw or Jacob deGrom. Also don't think he's necessary, but certainly, I mean, the biggest upside, probably has a decent floor here, too, against David Hale tonight. He was allowed a 385 WOBA and 7 home runs in just 24 innings to left-handed batters. So Bryce Harper, certainly your top option, but he's $6,400 on DraftKings. Can't imagine him having much ownership in cash games. I won't be ponying up that amount for him there. $5,700 on FanDuel, like I said, a little bit easier to stomach, but you certainly have to make some sacrifices there. So not a route that I'll be taking more often than not. Outfield, I do love Aaron Hicks. He's got a great price on both sites, 31 on FanDuel, 35 on DraftKings. Another guy who's got a ton of power. He's been mashing lefties. You know the drill here by now with these Minnesota bats against CC Sabathia. Jacoby Ellsbury just continues to be way too cheap on FanDuel. He's $3,000. I'll have a ton of exposure to him once again. Really hard not to. Other guys to consider: Cargo and Blackman. I guess I should tell you, Carlos Gonzalez and Charlie Blackman. Both those guys in Coors Field. I like Blackman better as a cash game play, as always, with that massive stolen base upside. Stolen base floor, I guess I should say as well. But Carlos Gonzalez, obviously, the higher upside. You're likely not paying for both of these guys. I think if you're paying for one in cash, for me, it's definitely Charlie Blackman because he's cheaper, does have that higher floor, doesn't have to go yard to pay off his tag. I think this is a guy that can definitely do it all. So I like him a great deal. Other options in the outfield here. Gregory Polanco finally had a letdown game yesterday, but not a guy that I'm terribly concerned about. I know he's been hitting the ball well. Everybody's going to have an off day. It just so happened to be his took a couple weeks to come out, so I like him a ton tonight as well. As far as cheap options, there's not a whole lot that really stands out. Jason Worth is fairly cheap on both sides, 37 on FanDuel, 35 on DraftKings. So if you're looking for cheap exposure to Coors Field, he's probably your best bet outside of Ben Paulson. You can get him in the outfield so you don't have to sacrifice your first base position for, a ground ball hitter like Ben Paulson. So definitely like that. Michael Kadire, really cheap if you're picking on Gausman. Near minimum salary on FanDuel, he's 31 on DraftKings. I don't think he's a bad option either. Excuse me. And then as you look all the way down, there's not a whole lot that really stands out. Not a lot of great matchups for these cheap guys. But I think my favorite guy, probably Shane Victorino. Near minimum salary on both sides. We know that's even more valuable on DraftKings. So thank you for hanging out with me here. If you have any questions for me, I'm at BigItaly42. Go over to dailyfantasycafe.com. Check out all of our great content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And check out our optimizer and our cheat sheets. A lot of great content to help you win at DFS today. And we'll see you next time.